Hi everyone.
Hi.
Nice to see so many of you. I know you're eating and I'm trying to make you say hi and your mouth's full, and that's not a very nice thing to do. It's interesting to come back to Otaniemi because this was where I went to school, and I haven't been here again for a while. I tend to come back here like once a year, usually talk to the students about testing. I nowadays work at F-Secure. I've been there now for 8 months. So whatever I've done there in the 8 months, that's still fairly recent. I also worked there about 10 years ago, and back then for 3 years. And I've had this habit of changing companies every 2 to 4 years. So I've been around a bit, and nowadays one of the things, or ways of being around is I like doing talks in conferences because that's one of the best ways to learn when people correct you. You know, you get experts listening to you and they correct you, or they tell you that they didn't understand anything you said. So all of you are my experts today in that sense. I'd be happy to get your comments and questions and feedback at any time, so just feel free to ask. But I've been doing these conference talks a lot recently, so I just realized that I've done 75 in the last 2.5 years. So it's kind of like a hobby of mine to travel around the world on somebody else's money. So I suggest everybody would try that, because everyone has a story to tell. That's kind of what I've found. The thing we're going to be talking about today is, well, the title is very fancy, like there's 2 different versions of it. It's about basically learning in layers, or when I tried to explain this to somebody, I said that I'm going to talk about exploratory testing. And this one guy that I was talking to, he looked at me and said, like, can you tell what that means? Like you were talking to somebody who isn't a developer, like nobody knows what this means. And I got, like at that point when he was asking me in this like informal setting, I got very like confused on like how would I explain all of this? Like, come to my talk, it's gonna take the whole talk to explain this. But then I realized that I should have told him that I'm kind of like a feedback fairy in software projects. So I come with all kinds of information and news. Usually the news is that things are not quite as we would hope them to be. Something doesn't work. And I'm nice in the sense that where the end users tell you in very strong words and which might include shouting and might include not sleeping tonight when you're fixing things, I tend to give you a bit more of a head start on getting the fixes done. So that's why I kind of think of myself as a feedback fairy. So I do software testing, and I learn about applications so that I can teach the others what we didn't yet know and what we might want to react on. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and we're going to also be doing a little bit of a demo so that you get an idea of the type of testing that I do. You will see code, but we will not be writing code today, so that's not the point of the talk today. Looks like the slides are working a bit weirdly here today. Let me check this. It lost half of my text here. Now it came back, so it's just all there. So the thing that I usually do is that I focus on empirical evidence. That's the type of feedback that I provide. So we have a lot of these ideas of we design things to be in a certain way. And then you have to actually use the application to, check if things are true as they were supposed to be. But you're also looking for empirical evidence of things that you didn't even expect. So a lot of times the way I think of my work is kind of this. I'm a tester. I break things, but I don't break the code. I break people's illusions. So people have these perceptions. They believe that the end users will be happy when we give them this feature. And I tell them that, the end users will be happy, but they won't be giving us money for that. Mm-hmm. So I have developers telling me that, I coded it. It should be working. It works because I made it work. I even tested it myself. And I go and try it. I do it twice, for example, last week. And on the second time, it didn't work. So again, we have these illusions that we built from things on how software actually works and what makes it fail. And that's the information that I tend to come in with. So the approach that I use, it's called exploratory testing. So this whole very complicated term It basically means that I look at an application, I come up with ideas on what I could do with it, I look at all the information around me from all the 23 years that I've been doing these kind of things, and I put them systematically together to figure out the information. So discover risks, discover things that might be missing, and being very rigorous about that. So I used the term in the first slide, learning in layers. It means that when I go to a new application, I of course won't know much about that application. Like, I have never maybe even seen it before. It maybe was just implemented. It hasn't been used by anyone other than the developer himself or herself. And while I don't know much on the first half an hour, after the first half an hour I know more. And the way I work is kind of like the attitude. I think this is a general professional attitude that would be a good thing to learn for everyone, is that whenever you go to work on the next morning, you're supposed to be a little better than yesterday. And testing is just my way of being very active and very deliberate about that learning. But all of this kind of still sounds very abstract, so that's why I want to show you how that actually works on an application. So we're going to be looking at a new application fairly soon. But before we go into that, I still wanted to kind of give you an idea that nowadays, when we talk about software testing, there's actually two kinds of software testing that we talk about. There's this usual, maybe even would say traditional way of looking at software testing. I would call it testing as artifact creation. Your end result is that you create tests, you run tests, the tests are created, the tests are run, and there's an artifact that helps you do that kind of things. It's often nowadays, in the modern world, well, we might have a checklist, like a detailed checklist of the test cases, but in the modern days, we are trying to both automate it, so we have a lot of test automation artifacts, but we're also trying to push as much of it into the smaller scale, unit testing scale, as possible. But then again, there's different sizes of units, so that's why I use the word unit testing on this slide. So it could also be automated testing. This type of testing as artifact creation, it basically gives us four kinds of things, four kinds of information. If we do it before we try to implement something in software development, it gives us a better clarity on what we're trying to do. Like, example, this is what it's supposed to do. If I do this, this is supposed to happen. That's the spec part of it. Then, when you're implementing, if you have that as test automation, maybe the test-driven development approaches are the things that modern world sees a lot, you get feedback. It was supposed to do this. Does it do exactly that? Then later on, months pass, and those tests keep on running. On every time you make a change, they keep on running, and they show you green, all is well. And one of these days, they show you red. Something is different than before, because they keep on doing things automatically in the background. That's when you get the other value, which is regression. You get feedback on something being different than before, presumably worse than before, and that's information where you need to react. And the last bit that this kind of testing gives us is granularity. Depending on how big of a scale we are looking at, we might be able to pinpoint immediately, oh, I changed here, this broke, here's the connection. And it helps us fix things immediately. Whereas if you have a big thing that you're going through, maybe you need to go and look and read through whatever results were there before you can pinpoint it. So hopefully it gives you also, this type of testing gives you granularity. And this is a very relevant part of testing. This is the test automation part that most of my colleagues, for example, at F-Secure do. And it's an important work. It's the full-time work of several people I would call developers, but they are developers and testers at the same time. I participate in this sometimes, but my main focus is on the other kind of testing, the exploratory part of it. So I think of testing, the other kind of testing, the one that I focus on, as testing as a performance. Kind of like, you go on stage and you are kind of improvising, you're thinking of what's the next thing that should happen. You have an overall idea of where you're heading and what kind of things you want to do. But things won't always go quite as planned. You might learn something on the way, and that makes you explain things, for example, in a stage a bit differently. So the testing as a performance, it gives us a bit different type of feedback as the exploratory side. It gives us guidance. So it doesn't say yes or no, pass or fail. It says, is this a good direction? Should we have a discussion about this instead of a black and white pass or not? We might be able, after that discussion, to turn it into a pass or not pass type of a feedback thing. But before we have that discussion, it's usually more of a understanding if these kind of things are relevant. We haven't even talked about them yet. It gives us often a deeper understanding, like learning more, going deeper. So I tend to typically have these cases where it's all been automated on our new component. You know, we write on the disk saying, it's done, we're ready to put it in production, it has test automation. And I look at it and I have 30 more issues to find. So the deeper understanding of things and how they connect is something that is easier to do in this performance type of mode than focusing on the details. It usually gives us models, meaning I can teach things to others faster by showing this is what it looks like. And it gives us serendipity, which means lucky accidents. I think one of the best examples that I have out of a lucky accident is when I started in my previous place of work before F-Secure. On day one, you know, when you start as a new employee, you have these like introductory sessions, like somebody shows you around the company. But they started with me so that they gave me the access to the system, like here's our web application, and I linked it, I put the link into my bookmarks, and then I went into these like, you know, company numbers, how many employees, blah, 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 type of things. I came back about 3 hours later, and if I didn't have the link, it would have been hard for me to remember where the application was. But since I had the link, I clicked on it, and the application crashed. That's something I didn't intend on that day, but I would have given the application enough chances and being rigorous about it so that I would have found it later on as well if I wasn't lucky. But a lot of times when we spend time with the application and we do things actively differently, serendipity hits us. The lucky accidents of problems that nobody expected. And those are the problems that end users tend to see a lot in doing things. So I kind of look at this so that the product, it's my external imagination. 23 years with software testing means that when I see a new application, it whispers to me immediately. It says, click here, this button, do this. It tells me, like, well, my background is kind of like my head is saying, why would anyone want to use this? And the application says, maybe it's because. Try if you could do this. So kind of like I have this continuous dialogue with the application. So that's the special part of what I do. And I've learned to listen to the applications because I've spent so much time with various applications. I can connect information from business side and from the technical side. I can and I am a programmer as well, so I can also use whatever programming tools needed to extend my reach in how it speaks to me and what it asks me to do. But the listening is the hard part. And I'm noticing that a lot of times while the product is my external imagination, I'm my developers and my teammates' external imagination. I was pairing with a developer sitting next to him, and I decided to not say a word. He would look at me and say, oh, you'd want me to click here. I didn't say anything. Click, click, crash. You would want me to use different data here, like I'm using always the same data. Like, well, you know that you should, but like I didn't say anything. And they changed the data set that they were using, and again, click, click, crash. So they know how to do this. Like everyone can learn in layers and actively change their behaviors with the application. It's not that it's just the specialists. Everyone can get started on this. But sometimes my developers need me as the external imagination so that they start thinking of the ways it will fail or could fail or things that they haven't yet considered. So there's this shared way of doing things. So the second part that I want to do today is to show you what this actually means with a new application. So for this, I will need a volunteer, because a lot of the things in software development, including testing, happens, inside somebody's head. That's not a good thing to do. If I do something and it happens inside my head and try to use the computer at the same time, it's going to be almost impossible for you to follow what I do and why I do. And if we want to see kind of like that type of things that the intention was that we would see today, I will need somebody to be my hands, and the place on the computer, I would call that a resting place. It's not like you don't have to be responsible for anything. All the thinking, all the ideas of what needs to happen in testing come from outside the computer. So people in the group can suggest things to me, but I'm the main responsible tester here. So I just need somebody to be my hands. And this style of pairing, it's called strong style pairing. And I really like doing this with my, for example, our now 15-year-old intern that has been joining us, that he stays to be my hands for the whole day. And it was awesome when after 2 days he says now he understands testing and he wants to do this as his work. So it's a good thing to do. So for an idea from my head to go to the computer, I need a volunteer. Who would be my hands today? All right? Yeah, join here.
Yes.
Get on the computer. I can move here. I think here I can be still. I'm still on the camera. All right. So this is as much code as I will show you. We have about, let's say, 10, 15 minutes of testing that we're going to be doing. So that's not a long time of testing. So we can choose to invest that testing in this new application with all of the source code on this machine in any way we like. That's the power of exploratory testing. Like, you can do whatever you want. But instead of, reading all this code, I want to get something done in the 10 minutes that we're spending on the computer.
Yeah.
So let's just start the application. So run the application. There's a little green button on the top row, which starts the application.
Okay.
If I wanted, I could read the code and I could figure out what's wrong with the code. But you can imagine that's going to be much slower than what we're going to be doing today. So here we have an application. I have a bit of background information on it. It's called Dark Function Editor. Looks kind of ugly, right? Like an empty screen. I would already say I would like to talk to somebody about how it starts up and how bad it looks. And maybe actually we'll start by making a note of that. So in Safari, open the Safari browser. Here's my notes. Like, my main tool of thinking is that whenever I have a feeling, it's a trigger for me to make a note of something, to have a discussion with someone else or help myself think. So let's make a note. Let's put there bugs. Like, click on the middle and then tab, and you get another node under it, yes.
Okay.
And write bugs. And then tab again, or enter and tab. And under that, let's say startup looks ugly. Like, just the startup screen is very it really doesn't give us any information about the application. So if I would have a commercial application like this, it wouldn't give me a really good first impression. So that's something that I would really want to talk about with some. So let's go back to the application. 3 finger swipe to right, I think. So 3 fingers on the mouse pad, and then you get there. See, I've been doing this a bit nowadays, not touching the keyboard. This is extremely difficult to do in the beginning, because we have thousands of hours, hands from our head to the keyboard. But this whole disconnect, it takes practice. And I've been doing this for now 2 years, so getting to survive with this one. So let's open, there's a file menu. Let's open the file menu. And let's create something new. Let's do an animation set. I know that there's this feature called animation set here. And we need some test data. I've created it for us before. So GitHub repositories, click on that. Dark Function Editor, that's what the tool is called. Testing resources. Star Wars images. Any other Star Wars fans here? Yeah. And SVO sprites, let's take that one. The last one. So now we have some test data open in the application. Now, let's stop for a moment. I tell you what the application is about. The high-level two-line thing about this application, that it's an editor for sprites. You can create moving animations with it. And that's all I need to know to get started with testing it. So I want to do something with the editor for that purpose. And again, I could ask, why would anyone want to use it? That's usually the first question that I have. But before I can really answer that, I need to see, like, what can you do with it? So, can we get anything done here? Like, anyone in the audience, what would you do here?
Click the green button. Yeah.
Click the green button. Was that obvious to you?
No.
No. So the first thing I want to do is make a note of the, back in the Safari, let's make another note of a bug, that it looks inactive in the editor.
It looks
Inactive. It actually is inactive. I've seen a group of people testing this spend 10 minutes before they could figure out press the green button. So let's go press the green button.
this one, right?
Yes. So now it all looks active. And again, I have very little time for testing this today, so I need to make my choices of what I use my time on as a tester very deliberately. I could decide, I want to find the sunny day scenario. That's usually like a demo thing. But I like to demo rather the idea that as a tester, I can choose any piece that I see on the screen that kind of speaks to me. And this bit here, it speaks to me a lot. It kind of shouts at me, and it's a list and it's a buttons. That should be like easy and focus testing. Let's take a look at that one. So let's try the 4 buttons that we have. I could ask, usually I would ask him to make notes of what each of the buttons are, like I'm listing every functionality so that I can make sure that I kind of keep track of what I've tested and how deep I've tested them. But since I'm saving time, I'm not going to ask it, so let's just try them. Click the plus again. Is there a mouse over text on that?
No. On
No?
the plus.
On the plus? No mouse over text?
Oh,
Yes.
Oh yeah, there is something. So it's an add an animation thing, so it seems to be like sort of on a high level doing that. Let's try the minus. I assume that's then the delete. Okay. And when we deleted, we didn't have the other ones active anymore.
Yeah, because
Can you delete that one as well? So what happens then? Does it go back to the original thing? So yeah, okay. So then the plus. And a plus again. Is the third one now active? Like we have a chosen thing. Try clicking on it. So duplicate, it seems inactive. So I would actually make a note of this, that it can't really see it. It seems like it's inactive.
Yeah.
It's hard to say that. So let's make a note of that, just the bugs today.
okay. How do I save it?
So let's say animations pane and tab under it. And let's say duplicate looks inactive. Actually, probably duplicate, and then I would tab under the duplicate. I assume I will find more problems on the duplicate when I continue testing on it. So I'm kind of building this map of things that I can move around wherever I want to. I'm not going to be demoing much longer today, so I'll actually let you go now.
Okay.
So thank you for my amazing help. On this particular thing here, there's so many things that you could do. Like there's double clicks and right clicks, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. There's so much inconsistency. I've had groups report 30 problems on that little box alone. This application in general, it's a great demo application for testing because it's what I would call a target-rich environment. So it has a lot of bugs. It's an open source project. Somebody made a tool for his own purposes, open sourced it, anyone other can use it. And it seems to have somewhat of a relevant amount of downloads as well. And I've noticed that recently the developer has closed all bug reports, saying only bug reports through submissions to fix this are allowed. So I suspect that I've introduced somebody into the project where they wanted to tell how it doesn't work. I've never taken the time myself to report back to the developer. But on my normal day of work, that's all I do. I go and talk to the developer about these problems. But I can also, every time I see something, I can actively make the decision. Will I interrupt them, him or her, right now? Or will I interrupt her, let's say, in 2 hours, when they're about to come back from lunch, and won't be as much interrupted by me going and talking about these things. So people are more susceptible to, or more open to feedback. There's research actually on this. After lunch, so if you are a convict and you want to apply for freedom from jail, most likely time when you get that is right after lunch. So, you know, all these kind of psychological tricks is something that a lot of testers tend to be interested in. But this style of testing, there's a lot of free form to it, but I would like to mention that there's actually 3 ways of scoping, like how much of this you do. I do this as my solo way of doing also automation within my work. I explore, I time box doing something in different ways, and it's the way I organize all of my work. It's very flexible and my plans change all the time. So that's one scope, like it's a way of living as an exploratory tester. Other people do this so that they scope 1 day a week or 2 hours a week, maybe having the whole team come together and test in this way. And there's also organizations that have traditional test cases, and they scope it so that they tell the testers to read between the lines. If it says click here, why don't you click twice? If it doesn't say what data to use, why not use a different data set than you were using yesterday? Be always actively different. So 3 ways of scoping. And there's even more ways of managing. There's a thing called session-based test management. Split your days into a couple of hours. What I do with mind maps is called thread-based test management. There's all these bring people together. There's an article by James Lindsay on 20 ways of managing exploratory testing. So this can also be very visible on what's going on and what you're learning, depending on how much you wanna invest on the management. A lot of the things that I know that I need to do come from ideas called test heuristics. So there's like rules of thumb on what kind of things typically fail. If you can do Goldilocks, too big, too small, and just right, usually some of them fail. And one of my real favorites is the so-called coffee break test. Leave it somewhere when you go for coffee or lunch. Make a note in a post-it note, usually where you left it, and see if you can continue after lunch. It's okay if you can't continue if it locks you out, but sometimes you can't get back to the thing that you were doing before lunch because you left it in the middle. So then that would be a more relevant bug. Like I said, I'm also a programmer, even though a lot of exploratory testers don't need to be programmers. I've identified as a programmer for the last 2 years, but then again, for realizing that I've written code in 15 different languages over the last 23 years, it's kind of funny, I didn't identify as a programmer before, but the automation and the code that I write tends to be disposable of by nature. So the regression, rerunning and seeing the same problems, that's not usually the problem that I'm solving. I'm trying to figure out how could I get 10,000 rules on this list without, clicking through it 10,000 times, because that's just stupid. We have tools for that purpose. And in this current world, I kind of like to draw this picture here saying testing is everywhere. We talk about things like shift left, which means try not to test only with the application. But since we're nowadays releasing applications on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, depending on the organization, whatever is here before implementation, everything after the implementation is also before the next implementation. So you can test wherever, and both the different styles of testing kind of take precedence or bigger activity in different times. And a lot of the testing that I do can happen against a version that is already in production. Only the critical stuff of it has to happen before. So feedback can happen also after we've already delivered. What's the missing features? What's the missing aspects? What are we seeing in production? So what I wanted to end this with is a picture from my daughter. She's 8 years old. I asked her to draw me, the 3 main roles that I tend to run into in the world of testing. There's people like me, that's apparently how I look, according to my daughter, like who identify as testers, professional testers. The best ones of us tend to identify as exploratory testers, but some of us don't want to use that label at all, because you should be, you're just a tester. There's really great testers who focus on test automation. I think of them as test automation programmers, but they can choose their own identity. Everyone is free to call themselves whatever they want in the world. I get corrected so much on what I can call myself that I feel very strongly about these kind of things. And then there's the testers who like to identify as application programmers or, well, even business product owners. And even if they don't realize they're doing testing, this whole learning in layers, giving feedback, being active about things you see, it's kind of a cornerstone of the way we collaborate and work together in the modern world. I've been a tester for a while. It has helped me find people I can learn from. But not being a tester, not identifying as a tester, or doing things that are not testing as such, they make me more valuable. So for me, it's important to be a tester. I don't need to be the fireman who starts to be an arson, starting up fires so that I can, take them out. I can help people take the fires out before they ever even emerge. But the fires are still a big part of my identity. So that's what I wanted to share today.
Thanks.
Thank you.